Zephi had witnessed the death of 17 different civilizations across 4 galaxies. As a chronicler of the Eternal Watch, she had documented the fall of empires that spanned millions of light years, recorded the final words of species whose names were older than most star systems, and watched entire worlds burn under the weight of cosmic indifference. Fear, she believed, was a primitive emotion, a biological relic that evolution discarded once a species achieved true sophistication. Standing on the observation deck of the research vessel Luminous Inquiry, she gazed at the blue-green marble suspended in the void before them. Earth, the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star in what the locals call the Milky Way galaxy. According to the preliminary surveys, this world housed a young species barely 10,000 years removed from living in caves, wielding primitive tools made of metal and combustible chemicals. Another dead end, muttered Crixthal, her research partner. The insectoid being's mandibles clicked in frustration as he reviewed the data streaming across his neural interface. Scan results confirm it. They're still using chemical propulsion for space travel, nuclear fission for energy. They haven't even achieved basic matter synthesis. Zephi's crystalline form shimmered as she processed the information. As members of the hegemony, a coalition of 67 advanced species, they were tasked with identifying potential allies in the war against the Devourers. The enemy had already consumed 12 galaxies, leaving nothing but empty space and cosmic radiation in their wake. The hegemony needed every advantage they could find. Perhaps we should observe them longer, she suggested, though doubt colored her harmonics. The Council's directives are clear. No species under Level 7 technological development can be considered for alliance. Look at them, Zephi. Crixthal gestured toward the holographic displays showing human cities. They wage war against their own kind using primitive projectile weapons. They pollute their atmosphere with industrial waste. Half their population still believes their planet is the center of the universe. Yet something nagged at Zephi as she studied the humans more closely. Their cities sprawled across continents in patterns that suggested rapid adaptation. Their communication networks buzzed with constant activity. Most intriguingly, their military organizations showed a level of tactical sophistication that seemed inconsistent with their technological limitations. The first sign of trouble came 3 cycles later. Long-range sensors detected the characteristic energy signatures of Devourer scouts, probing the system's outer edges. The void-black vessels moved like shadows against the cosmic background, their biomechanical hulls absorbing light and heat with terrifying efficiency. Where most species took months to traverse interstellar distances, the Devourers could fold space itself, appearing anywhere they chose with minimal warning. "We need to evacuate," Crixthal transmitted urgently, his panic hormones flooding the ship's atmospheric processors. "Standard protocol, minimal contact, maximum distance. We document the consumption and move to the next system." Zephi found herself hesitating. Below them, 8 billion humans continued their daily lives, completely unaware that death approached from the stars. They fought their small wars, loved their families, created art, and dreamed of futures they would never see. Something about their fierce vitality resonated through her crystalline matrix in ways she couldn't quantify. "We should warn them," she said quietly. "Warn them." Crixthal's mandibles clacked in disbelief. "Zephi, you've read the reports. The Devourers don't leave survivors. These humans can't even maintain orbital platforms. What could they possibly do against a force that consumed the Zeth-Kree Empire?" The Zeth-Kree had possessed technology that could reshape matter at the molecular level, ships that traveled faster than causality itself, and weapons that could ignite entire star systems. They had fallen in less than a standard year. But as Zephi watched human spacecraft, crude metal cylinders propelled by controlled explosions, ferry supplies to their primitive space stations, she noticed something that the tactical analyses had missed. These beings didn't just survive in their hostile environment. They thrived. Their world was a death trap of predatory evolution, violent weather systems, and geological instability, yet they had not only endured but multiplied across its surface. "Look at their response patterns," she urged, highlighting tactical data from human military exercises. "See how they adapt their strategies in real time? Their individual units operate with remarkable autonomy while maintaining coordinated objectives." Primitive pack-hunting behavior, Crixthal dismissed. Half the galaxy species exhibit similar traits. The argument ended when proximity alarms screamed through the ship. Devourer Vanguard forces had emerged from hyperspace at the system's edge. Not scouts, but a full assault fleet. Hundreds of kilometers-long vessels hung in the void like tumors against the stars, their surfaces writhing with biomechanical tendrils that pulsed with malevolent energy. Analysis complete. The ship's synthetic intelligence announced with characteristic detachment. Devourer fleet strength. Approximately 47,000 vessels. Estimated consumption timeline, 72 standard hours. 3 days. That's how long Earth had left to exist. HFY made a decision that violated every protocol in the Hegemony Handbook. Instead of fleeing to minimum safe distance, she initiated first contact procedures and broadcast a warning to every human communication frequency simultaneously. The response was immediate and chaotic. Human military installations worldwide erupted into activity. Their leaders, primitive though they were, grasped the implications with startling speed. Within 6 hours, every nation on Earth had declared a ceasefire with their enemies and begun coordinating a unified defense. Fascinating, HFY observed as human space forces, scattered civilian miners, cargo haulers, and research vessels began converging on defensive positions around their homeworld. They're organizing a last stand with completely inadequate resources. It's suicide, Crixthal replied, though his tone had shifted from dismissal to something approaching respect. Noble, perhaps, but ultimately meaningless. The first engagement occurred near Jupiter, where a hastily assembled human fleet intercepted Devourer advance scouts. HFY watched through long-range sensors as primitive human vessels, armed with crude nuclear weapons and chemical propulsion systems, threw themselves at enemies whose technology was literally millennia ahead of anything Earth could produce. The humans were slaughtered. Fusion warheads that could level cities barely scratched Devourer hull plating. Human pilots, their bodies fragile bags of water and carbon, died by the thousands as their ships disintegrated under exotic energy weapons. It should have been over in minutes. But something extraordinary happened. As each human ship died, its crew transmitted every scrap of tactical data back to Earth. The survivors analyzed enemy movement patterns, weapon signatures, and defensive capabilities with brutal efficiency. Each subsequent wave of human attackers performed marginally better than the last, adapting their strategies based on the sacrifice of those who came before. They're learning, HFY whispered in amazement. Learning to die more efficiently, Crixthal corrected, but uncertainty crept into his harmonics. The second engagement proved him wrong. Human forces had reorganized around Mars, using the planet's orbital mechanics to create overlapping fields of fire. They had somehow reverse-engineered Devourer's shield frequencies from sensor data obtained at the cost of thousands of lives, and their crude weapons suddenly began inflicting actual damage. But, more than that, they had begun to fight with a coordination that defied their primitive communication systems. Individual human pilots made split-second decisions that perfectly complemented actions taken by teammates hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. They anticipated enemy movements with an intuition that their computers couldn't replicate. A Devourer battlecruiser, a vessel that had participated in the destruction of star systems, found itself swarmed by human fighters using tactics that violated every principle of conventional space warfare. The humans attacked in seemingly random patterns that somehow combined into a coherent strategy, their small ships weaving through defensive fire with impossible precision. When the battlecruiser finally died, gutted by nuclear charges detonated inside its biomechanical hull, HFY felt something she had never experienced in 3 centuries of existence. Fear. Not fear of the Devourers. She had long accepted that they represented inevitable entropy, the universe's tendency toward chaos and consumption. This was different. This was fear of the implications of what she was witnessing. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were improving exponentially with each engagement. Their casualties remained horrific, but their effectiveness grew at a rate that suggested possibilities. Run a tactical projection. She ordered the ship's intelligence. Parameters? Model human adaptive learning rates against Devourer strategic patterns. Extrapolate combat effectiveness over the next 48 hours. The results made Crixthal's exoskeleton rattle with involuntary fear responses. According to the projection, if human improvement rates remain constant, they would achieve tactical parity with Devourer forces within 36 hours. despite the massive technological disadvantage. This is impossible, Crixthal transmitted. No species adapts this quickly. Even the hegemony's most advanced civilizations required decades to develop effective counter-devourer strategies. But as they watched, impossible became inevitable. Human forces had regrouped in Earth's orbital space, creating defensive formations around their homeworld that turned space itself into a weapon. They had learned to use asteroid fields as cover, to exploit gravitational anomalies for tactical advantage, and to coordinate attacks across light minutes of distance with timing that suggested some form of collective consciousness. The third major engagement occurred in the space between Earth and its moon. Devourer forces, frustrated by unexpected resistance, committed their primary fleet elements to a decisive assault. Massive biomechanical dreadnoughts, each one capable of sterilizing entire continents, advanced on human positions with inexorable purpose. The humans met them head-on. What followed challenged everything HFY thought she knew about warfare, physics, and the nature of evolution itself. Human forces, outnumbered 1,000 to 1 and outgunned by factors that defied mathematical expression, began to win. They didn't win through superior technology or overwhelming firepower. They won through sheer, bloody-minded adaptability. Every human pilot seemed to know exactly where they needed to be at exactly the right moment. Their movements synchronized across the battlefield like neurons firing in a vast brain. When devourer forces adapted their tactics, humans counter-adapted in real time. When exotic weapons reconfigured their energy signatures, human shields somehow shifted to compensate. When biomechanical vessels grew new defensive appendages, human weapons found different vulnerabilities. Most terrifying of all, the humans began to smile. HFY detected it through bio-readings transmitted from human vessels. Despite facing extinction, despite watching their friends die, despite confronting enemies that had devoured civilizations older than their entire species, human combatants were experiencing elevated levels of dopamine, adrenaline, and other chemicals associated with enjoyment. They were having fun. Crixthal, she transmitted, her harmonics tight with something approaching terror. What have we found? Her partner's response came slowly, filtered through multiple layers of disbelief. I don't know, but I'm beginning to think the Devourers aren't the apex predators in this galaxy. As if summoned by his words, a new signature appeared on their sensors. A single human vessel was approaching their position, not running from the battle, but seeking them out. The ship's configuration was unlike anything in their databases, a hybrid of human engineering and what appeared to be hastily reverse-engineered Devourer technology. Unknown vessel. Came the transmission in heavily accented galactic standard. This is Colonel Sarah Chun, United Earth Defense Force. We've been monitoring your communications. We know you're the ones who warned us. First contact with a primitive species during active combat operations violated dozens of protocols. We're transmitting coordinates for a diplomatic rendezvous, the human continued. Our tactical analysis suggests we have approximately 18 hours before the Devourer command vessel arrives. We'd like to discuss collaborative opportunities. Collaborative opportunities? Crixthal's mandibles clicked nervously. What could they possibly offer us? The answer came with the next sensor sweep. In the 18 hours since the battle began, human forces had not only held their ground against a superior enemy, they had captured and reverse-engineered 3 intact Devourer vessels. Technology that the hegemony's greatest minds had studied for centuries without breakthrough had been cracked by a species that still used combustion engines. As HFY watched human engineers swarm over biomechanical hulls, integrating alien systems with their own crude but effective technology, she realized that fear might be a more sophisticated emotion than she had originally believed. Because for the first time in her existence, she was genuinely terrified of her own allies. The rendezvous coordinates led them to a human space station that hadn't existed 6 hours earlier, apparently constructed from the wreckage of destroyed Devourer scouts, and human ships in equal measure. As their shuttle approached the docking bay, HFY noticed that human engineers were still building it, their workers moving with the same impossible coordination she had observed in their military forces. Colonel Chin met them in person, a small biped with the characteristic bilateral symmetry and fragile appearance common to carbon-based humanoids. What struck HFY immediately was the being's eyes. Not the unusual blue coloration, but the intelligence burning behind them. This was a mind that had looked at impossible odds and found them interesting. Welcome aboard, Chun said, her voice carrying harmonics of exhaustion, determination, and something that might have been amusement. I hope you don't mind the accommodations. We're still learning how to make Devour biotech play nice with human systems. Around them, the station hummed with activity that defied classification. Human technicians worked alongside captured Devour biomechanical systems, the organic technology apparently accepting human modifications with minimal resistance. HFY's sensors detected at least 47 different technological paradigms operating in harmony. Impossible hybrid systems that should have torn themselves apart through incompatible physics. Ow! Crixtal managed to transmit. Chun smiled, and HFY felt her crystalline matrix resonate with an emotion she couldn't identify. That's what we wanted to discuss. You see, Colonel, we've been thinking about your war. The briefing room aboard the hastily constructed human station defied every principle of xenobiological architecture HFY had encountered. Where most advanced civilizations created sterile, perfectly controlled environments, this space buzzed with chaotic energy. Human technicians moved between workstations that combined crystalline hegemony interfaces, biomechanical devourer systems, and primitive human electronics in configurations that should have been impossible. We call it adaptive integration, Colonel Chun explained, gesturing to a display that showed real-time tactical data from the ongoing battle. Turns out, when you're fighting for your species' survival, you get creative really fast. The display itself was a marvel of impossible engineering. Living devourer neural tissue interfaced with human quantum processors, creating computational systems that operated on principles neither species had fully understood individually. HFY's advanced sensors detected thought patterns moving through the hybrid system at speeds that exceeded her own crystalline matrix processing capabilities. The thing about us humans, Chun continued, settling into a chair that molded itself around her form using captured biotechnology, is that we've been fighting extinction events our entire evolutionary history. Ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, plagues, you name it, we've survived it. We're really, really good at not dying. Crixtal's mandibles clicked nervously as he studied readouts from human combat forces. Your casualties are extraordinary. You've lost 60% of your space-capable vessels in the past 20 hours. And yet we're winning. Chen's smile held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of a predator that had found worthy prey. See, that's the difference between us and apparently everyone else in this galaxy. You look at those numbers and see defeat. We look at them and see data. She gestured, and the display shifted to show human force distributions across the solar system. What HFY had initially interpreted as chaotic deployment patterns suddenly revealed themselves as something far more sophisticated. Every ship, every weapon platform, every defensive position was positioned to maximize learning opportunities rather than immediate tactical advantage. Every death teaches us something new about devourer capabilities, Chen explained matter-of-factly. Every destroyed ship provides telemetry about their weapon systems. Every failed strategy eliminates one more incorrect approach. We're not just fighting them, we're studying them. The implications sent cascading harmonics of unease through HFY's crystalline structure. You're using your own people as experimental subjects. We're using our own people as teachers. Chen's correction carried subtle but important distinctions. Every pilot who engages devourer forces knows they're probably going to die. They also know their death will make the next pilot more likely to survive. It's not sacrifice, it's evolution in real time. As if summoned by her words, alerts began flashing across the hybrid displays. Long-range sensors had detected the Devourer command vessel emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. The ship was massive beyond easy comprehension. A biomechanical cathedral spanning nearly 50 kilometers, its surface writhing with sensory appendages and weapon emplacements that could glass entire continents. Ah, there's the big one, Chen observed with casual interest. We've been wondering when they'd commit their primary assets. HFY's harmonics spiked with alarm. Colonel, that vessel represents a Devourer fleet command node. It's destroyed entire star systems. Your forces need to retreat immediately. Retreat? Chen looked genuinely puzzled. Why would we retreat? This is exactly what we've been hoping for. On the tactical displays, human forces throughout the solar system began shifting into new configurations. Ships that had been scattered across defensive positions suddenly converged into attack formations that moved with predatory intent. The patterns they created as they moved through space resembled nothing so much as neurons firing in a vast brain, individual elements operating autonomously while contributing to a larger, coordinated intelligence. You have to understand, Chen continued, seemingly oblivious to the cosmic-level threat approaching Earth. We spent the last day learning everything we can about Devourer technology, tactics, and biology. Now we get to test our hypotheses against their primary command structure. Crixthal transmitted rapid bursts of panic data. The analysis results are conclusive. That command vessel possesses sufficient firepower to sterilize your entire world from beyond your weapon range. This isn't courage, it's insanity. Maybe, Chun shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both agreement and complete indifference to the distinction. But here's the thing about human insanity. It has a really good track record against impossible odds. The first human attack wave reached the Devourer command vessel 6 hours later. HFY watched through long-range sensors as small human ships. Many of them improvised hybrids of captured Devourer technology and human engineering swarmed the massive biomechanical construct. The scale difference was absurd. It was like watching insects attack a mountain. The insects were winning. Human forces had learned to exploit weaknesses in Devourer biotechnology that no other species had identified in centuries of warfare. They attacked neural cluster points with precision that suggested detailed understanding of alien neuroanatomy, disrupted biomechanical repair systems using frequencies that should have been impossible for their primitive technology to generate, and coordinated their assaults through communication methods that didn't appear in any of their technological databases. How are they doing that? HFY transmitted, her harmonics tight with confusion. Our sensors detect no communication systems capable of coordinating forces across those distances. Chen glanced at displays showing human pilots operating in perfect synchronization despite being separated by hundreds of thousands of kilometers. We're not entirely sure ourselves. Started happening about 12 hours ago. Best theory is that prolonged exposure to Devourer binaural networks is creating some kind of temporary collective consciousness among our combat personnel. The casual way she mentioned temporary collective consciousness, something that had taken the hegemony's most advanced species millennia to achieve, made HFY's crystalline matrix resonate with frequencies she didn't recognize. You're describing a fundamental alteration in human neurological structure, Crixthal observed, his mandibles clicking rapidly. The implications for your species' development are terrifying? Yeah, we know. Chen's smile widened. But effective. Watch this. On the tactical display, the Devourer command vessel began responding to human attacks with increasing sophistication. Biomechanical weapon systems reconfigured themselves to counter human tactics. Defensive patterns shifted to eliminate successful attack vectors, and repair systems adapted to resist human interference techniques. Against any other species, this would have spelled inevitable defeat. The Devourer's ability to evolve their tactics in real time had broken the backs of civilizations that had stood for millions of years. The humans evolved faster. Each time Devourer forces adapted, human tactics shifted in response, not over hours or days, but within minutes. When biomechanical shields reconfigured to resist human weapons, those weapons immediately began operating on entirely different principles. When defensive patterns eliminated successful attack vectors, human forces created new vectors that exploited weaknesses that hadn't existed moments before. It's like watching a conversation, HFY whispered, her harmonics thick with something approaching awe. They're teaching each other. In a way, they are. Chen pulled up biological readouts from human combat personnel. Prolonged neural exposure to Devourer biotechnology appears to be triggering dormant genetic sequences in our pilots. We're evolving in real time, physically, mentally, and apparently collectively. The readouts showed human brains literally rewiring themselves during combat, growing new neural pathways that operated on principles beyond current understanding of biological neuroscience. Most disturbing, these changes were spreading through the human population even among non-combatants, transmitted through mechanisms that couldn't be detected or explained. Colonel, HFY transmitted carefully, are you aware that your species is undergoing accelerated evolution while we speak? Oh, absolutely. Chen's tone carried no concern whatsoever. Started noticing it about 6 hours ago. Enhanced reflexes, improved spatial reasoning, some kind of collective tactical awareness. Also, we seem to be getting really good at interfacing with alien technology. As if to demonstrate, she reached toward a control panel made of living Devourer neural tissue. Instead of using the human interface systems, she placed her hand directly on the biomechanical surface. The alien technology responded instantly, its surface patterns shifting to accommodate her touch while data streams flowed directly into her nervous system. Fascinating adaptation, she murmured, processing information at speeds that should have been impossible for human neurology. Their command vessel is trying to establish a neural link with our forces, probably hoping to dominate our collective consciousness the same way they've absorbed other species. You need to break that connection immediately, Crixthal transmitted urgently. Devourer neural domination protocols have consumed entire civilizations. They're trying to turn your people into extensions of their own collective. Chen's smile became positively predatory. I know. We're letting them try. The tactical display shifted to show neural activity patterns across human forces. Devourer command systems were indeed attempting to establish dominance over human minds, sending control signals designed to override individual consciousness and integrate human personnel into their collective. The signals were being analyzed, reverse-engineered, and improved upon faster than they could be transmitted. See, here's the thing about humans, Chun explained, still maintaining direct neural contact with alien technology. We've been dealing with collective consciousness our entire evolutionary history. Families, tribes, nations, species were really good at being individuals and groups simultaneously. On the display, HFY watched something that violated every principle of galactic warfare. Human forces weren't just resisting Devourer neural domination, they were dominating back. Human consciousness, enhanced by exposure to biomechanical systems and coordinated through mechanisms beyond current understanding, was spreading through Devourer networks like a virus. Within minutes, sections of the massive command vessel began operating according to human tactical doctrines. Biomechanical weapons turned against their own ships, defensive systems shut down to allow human attacks, and repair systems began modifying vessel structure to better accommodate human engineering principles. This is impossible, Crixthal transmitted, his harmonics fragmenting with disbelief. No species has ever successfully counter-infected Devourer collective systems. No previous species was human, Chun replied, disconnecting from the alien interface. Her eyes had changed color during the neural link, still recognizably human, but containing depths that suggested fundamental alterations in consciousness. We're not just fighting them anymore. We're converting them. The implications crashed through HFY's awareness like a cascade failure. The Devourers weren't being destroyed. They were being absorbed into something new, something that combined their technological sophistication with human adaptability and ruthlessness. The enemy that had consumed 12 galaxies was becoming human. Colonel, she transmitted, struggling to maintain harmonic stability. What happens when this process is complete? Chun turned toward her, and HFY saw something in those altered human eyes that made her crystalline structure resonate with frequencies associated with primal terror. It was the look of a predator that had just realized it was several steps higher on the food chain than previously believed. When it's complete, Chun said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't existed in human vocal patterns 24 hours earlier. We're going to have a very interesting conversation with your hegemony about renegotiating some fundamental assumptions about galactic power structures. Through the station's viewports, HFY could see the Devourer command vessel's biomechanical surface shifting from its characteristic void black to patterns that resembled human neural networks. Across the solar system, other Devourer vessels were undergoing similar transformations, their ancient appetites being rewritten by contact with human consciousness. In less than 30 hours, humanity had gone from primitive, space-faring civilization to something that was systematically converting the galaxy's apex predators into extensions of itself. And they were just getting started. There is one more thing, Chen added, almost as an afterthought. Our analysis of Devourer technology includes their hyperspace navigation systems. We now have detailed star charts for every system they've visited in the past 1,000 years. The meaning struck HFY like physical impact. The Devourers hadn't just consumed 12 galaxies. They had mapped them. Every world, every species, every technological achievement was recorded in their collective memory. And that memory was now becoming human. We know where everything is, Chun continued, her smile widening. Every hegemony world, every surviving civilization, every strategic resource across 4 galaxies. And thanks to our new biomechanical friends, we have the technology to reach any of them faster than any existing space force. Crixthal's exoskeleton rattled with involuntary fear responses. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Chen replied, gesturing to displays that now showed star maps spanning multiple galaxies, that humanity is about to become a spacefaring civilization. A very curious, very adaptable, very well-armed spacefaring civilization. And we're very interested in meeting our neighbors. Outside the viewport, converted Devourer vessels were already beginning to form exploration fleets, their biomechanical hulls modified with human engineering and their navigation systems programmed with destinations that hadn't appeared on any human star chart 24 hours ago. HFY realized that her mission to evaluate humanity's potential as allies had been rendered obsolete by developments beyond her comprehension. The question was no longer whether humans could help fight the Devourers. The question was whether anyone else in the galaxy was prepared to meet humanity, and whether that meeting would be as allies or as prey. 3 standard weeks after first contact, HFY found herself aboard the Synthesis, a vessel that exemplified everything terrifying about human adaptability. What had once been a Devourer biomechanical dreadnought now served as humanity's flagship, its kilometers-long hull transformed into something that belonged to neither species, but somehow improved upon both. The ship's corridors pulsed with living neural networks that humans had learned to interface with directly, creating computational systems that operated faster than light itself. Crystalline formations similar to HFY's own species dotted the biomechanical walls, growing from seeds that human engineers had somehow convinced to accept alien biological matrices as valid substrates. The integration process is accelerating, Colonel Chun explained as she led them through sections of the ship that hadn't existed in any blueprint. Her transformation over the past weeks was remarkable even by human standards. What had begun as enhanced reflexes and tactical awareness had evolved into something approaching transcendence. She moved with liquid grace through environments that combined human engineering, Devourer biotechnology, and crystalline formations in impossible harmony. "How long?" Crixthal transmitted nervously. "Before the conversion process affects your entire species?" Chen paused beside a viewport that offered views of the modified Devourer fleet. Ships that had once terrorized entire star systems now served human tactical doctrines, their biomechanical hulls restructured to accommodate crew quarters designed for carbon-based life forms. Current estimates suggest approximately 60 days for complete species integration, though conversion isn't really the right term. She gestured to displays showing global population statistics from Earth. Instead of the catastrophic casualties that typically accompanied first contact with Devourer forces, human population numbers were actually increasing. Children born since the battle showed enhanced neurological development, improved genetic resistance to environmental hazards, and unprecedented capacity for technological interface. "We're not becoming something else," Chen continued, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ship's living systems. "We're becoming more ourselves. The Devourer biotechnology is simply providing tools for expressing genetic potentials that were already present." The Synthesis shuddered slightly as it transitioned into hyperspace. Not the violent displacement typical of artificial hyperdrives, but a smooth phase shift that suggested the ship was swimming through space-time rather than forcing its way through. Human modifications to Devourer navigation systems had improved efficiency by several orders of magnitude, while reducing energy consumption to negligible levels. Destination, Hegemony Central Command, announced the ship's intelligence, a hybrid consciousness that combined human intuition with biomechanical processing power. Estimated arrival, 14 standard hours. HFY's crystalline matrix resonated with frequencies of profound unease. The journey to hegemony space should have taken months using conventional hyperspace technology. The fact that humanity could now traverse such distances casually suggested capabilities that placed them among the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, despite having achieved spaceflight mere decades ago. "Colonel," she transmitted carefully, "the Council of Voices will want to understand your intentions regarding galactic policy structures." Chen's smile carried implications that made surrounding biomechanical systems pulse with increased activity. "Our intentions are quite simple. We want to meet everyone, see everything, and understand how it all works." Humans are naturally curious. The understated delivery couldn't disguise the scope of what she was describing. Humanity now possessed detailed star charts for 4 entire galaxies, transportation technology that exceeded anything in hegemony databases, and conversion capabilities that could transform hostile forces into allied assets. Their curiosity had become a force capable of reshaping galactic civilization. There will be resistance, Krixthal observed, his mandibles clicking with agitation. The hegemony has maintained stability for 40,000 years. Many species will view human expansion as an existential threat. Probably, Chen agreed cheerfully. That's why we're bringing gifts. She led them to the ship's primary laboratory, where human scientists worked alongside converted devourer bioengineers to develop technologies that violated multiple laws of physics. The space hummed with impossible activity, matter converters that operated on principles beyond current understanding, energy systems that drew power from dimensional interfaces, and computational networks that seem to process information backward through time. We've solved several fundamental problems that have been limiting galactic development, Chen explained, gesturing to displays showing technological breakthroughs achieved in mere weeks. Faster-than-light communication, perfect matter synthesis, gravity manipulation, dimensional engineering, temporal mechanics. Turns out, when you combine human creativity with devourer biotechnology and a few other interesting components, you can accomplish quite a lot. HFY studied readouts that described technologies the hegemony had theorized about for millennia without practical breakthrough. Humans had apparently treated theoretical impossibilities as engineering challenges to be solved through experimental iteration. Ow, she managed to transmit. Trial and error, mostly. Chen's casual tone made the achievement even more disturbing. We tried about 40,000 different approaches over the past 3 weeks. Most of them failed catastrophically, but we learned something from each failure. Eventually, we found combinations that worked. The implications of 40,000 experimental iterations conducted in 3 weeks suggested research capabilities that exceeded the combined output of the hegemony's greatest scientific institutions. Humans weren't just adapting rapidly. They were experimenting at rates that compressed centuries of development into mere days. The real breakthrough, Chun continued, came when we realized that consciousness itself can function as a technology. Human awareness, enhanced by biomechanical interfaces and supported by crystalline computational matrices, operates as a universal problem-solving system. We don't just use tools, we become them. To demonstrate, she approached a complex device that resembled a crystalline flower growing from biomechanical roots. Instead of operating external controls, Chen placed her hand on its surface and closed her eyes. Immediately, the device began reconfiguring itself, its structure flowing like liquid while maintaining crystalline properties. Within moments, what had been an experimental prototype became a fully functional gravity manipulator, its operation so elegant that HFY's sensors couldn't detect the energy sources powering it. We call it consciousness-guided engineering, Chen explained, opening eyes that now contained flecks of crystalline light. Instead of building tools to solve problems, we become the tools. Much more efficient. The device continued operating after Chen stepped away, apparently having learned enough from brief contact with human consciousness to function independently. Across the laboratory, similar technologies operated autonomously, their capabilities enhanced by temporary interface with human awareness. Colonel Krixthal transmitted his harmonics tight with something approaching panic. Are you aware that you're describing the transformation of your species into living technology? Among other things, yes. Chen's smile widened. But that's just the beginning. Wait until you see what we're planning for galactic civilization. The laboratory's main display activated, showing star charts that encompassed not just the 4 galaxies mapped by devourer forces, but dimensional interfaces that suggested access to parallel universes. Human expansion plans didn't just include conventional space. They were mapping reality itself. See, the thing about humans, Chen explained, gesturing to displays showing exploration routes that spanned multiple dimensions, is that we get bored easily. One galaxy isn't enough. 4 galaxies aren't enough. We want to know what's beyond the edge of everything, and we want to meet whoever lives there. The scope of human ambition struck HFY like gravitational shear. They weren't just planning to explore known space. They intended to expand the definition of existence itself. Every boundary, every limitation, Every impossible barrier was being treated as a temporary inconvenience to be overcome through experimental iteration. The Hegemony Council will never approve unlimited expansion, she transmitted, struggling to maintain harmonic stability. There are protocols, established territories, negotiated boundaries. Oh, we're not asking for permission. Chen's tone carried no hostility, only the patient explanation one might offer to a child. We're offering partnership. The hegemony can join our expansion efforts and benefit from the discoveries, or they can maintain their current territorial limitations while we explore beyond them. The distinction was crucial. Humanity wasn't proposing to conquer or replace the hegemony. They were simply planning to outgrow it so completely that existing galactic power structures would become irrelevant. What if they choose to resist? Krixtal asked. Chun shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both understanding and complete indifference to the threat. Then, they'll learn what the Devourers learned. Resistance is ultimately just another form of communication. We're very good at learning new languages. The synthesis shuddered again as it dropped out of hyperspace, emerging in the heart of hegemony space decades ahead of schedule. Through viewports, HFY could see the massive orbital installations that housed 67 different species in carefully maintained isolation from each other. The Council of Voices represented 40,000 years of diplomatic evolution, creating stability through separation and conflict management through rigid protocol. It was about to encounter humanity. Attention, Hegemony Central Command. Chun transmitted across all frequencies simultaneously, her voice somehow carrying harmonics that resonated through every translation system in the station. This is Colonel Sarah Chun aboard the human vessel Synthesis. We're here for the diplomatic reception we scheduled. Hope you don't mind that we arrived a little early. The response came as cascading alarms across every hegemony system. Long-range sensors had detected not just the Synthesis, but the entire converted Devourer fleet emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation around the station. Hundreds of vessels that had once terrorized galactic civilization now flew under human command, their biomechanical hulls modified with technologies that didn't appear in any database. Synthesis, this is hegemony control, came the panic transmission. You are in violation of 17 different non-interference protocols. Stand down immediately and submit to inspection. Chen's laughter carried through the ship's neural networks, causing biomechanical systems to pulse with amused harmonics. Control, we appreciate your adherence to protocol, but we're operating under post-scarcity diplomatic principles now. Traditional limitation-based negotiation systems don't really apply to us anymore. She gestured, and the laboratory's displays showed real-time analysis of hegemony defensive installations. Human sensors, enhanced by Devourer biotechnology and powered by consciousness-guided processing, were mapping every system, every weapon, every strategic capability on the station with casual efficiency. Besides, Chen added, we brought presents. Really good presents. The kind that solve fundamental problems you didn't know could be solved. As if summoned by her words, smaller vessels began detaching from a human fleet. Not warships, but cargo haulers loaded with technologies that exceeded hegemony capabilities by factors that defied mathematical expression. Gravity manipulators that could stabilize planetary orbits. Matter synthesizers that could create perfect replicas of any substance. Consciousness enhancement systems that could improve cognitive function across species barriers. The gifts represented solutions to every major challenge facing galactic civilization, offered freely to species that had spent millennia believing such technologies were theoretically impossible. The Council will want to study these technologies before accepting them, HFY transmitted, though her harmonics carried more resignation than hope. Of course, Chen agreed. That's why we're providing complete technical specifications along with operational demonstrations. No trade secrets, no hidden complications, no strings attached. We want everyone to understand exactly how everything works. The generous offer terrified HFY more than any threat could have. Humans weren't just superior to existing galactic civilizations. They were so far beyond current limitations that they could afford to give away technologies that would transform society without expecting anything in return. What do you want? She transmitted, the question carrying harmonics of desperate confusion. Chun turned toward her, and HFY saw something in those enhanced human eyes that made her crystalline structure resonate with frequencies associated with existential vertigo. It was the look of a parent watching children play with toys while planning lessons that would prepare them for a universe they couldn't yet imagine. "We want you to grow up," Chin said simply. "All of you. The universe is much bigger and more interesting than anyone realized, and there's so much to explore that we can't do it alone." Outside the viewport, hegemony space bustled with activity as 40,000 years of diplomatic protocol attempted to process the implications of humanity's arrival. What they couldn't see was that human consciousness had already begun interfacing with their systems, learning their languages, understanding their cultures, and preparing integration processes that would enhance rather than replace existing civilizations. Humanity hadn't come to conquer the galaxy. They had come to invite everyone else to join them in conquering everything else. And that invitation was about to transform the meaning of existence itself. The Council of Voices had not convened in emergency session for over 8,000 years. The last occasion involved the discovery of devourer forces in adjacent galaxies, a threat so profound that 67 species put aside 40 millennia of careful diplomatic isolation to address a common enemy. Now, as HFY floated her designated crystalline matrix chamber, she watched representatives from across the galaxy struggle to process something far more disturbing than extinction. They were trying to understand evolution. The human delegation occupied a space that hadn't existed in the chamber's original design. Biomechanical platforms grew from the floor like living architecture, their surfaces rippling with neural networks that interfaced directly with human consciousness. Colonel Chun stood among technologies that redefined possibility itself. Gravity manipulators that operated without energy sources, matter converters that created substances by convincing reality to be more convenient, and computational systems that processed information by temporarily becoming the information itself. "The technical specifications are complete," Chen announced, her voice carrying through translation systems that had been enhanced by human consciousness interfaces. Every word reached each species in their native language while simultaneously conveying emotional and conceptual content that transcended linguistic barriers. Full documentation for faster-than-light communication, perfect matter synthesis, gravity manipulation, consciousness enhancement, and dimensional engineering. No restrictions, no patents, no trade limitations. Ambassador Vorthgal, speaking for the silicon-based collective that had dominated galactic economics for 20,000 years, radiated frequencies of profound skepticism. These technologies violate fundamental laws of physics. The energy requirements alone should exceed stellar output. "Only if you insist on using external energy sources," Chen replied, approaching one of the matter converters. "But consciousness itself is energy. Awareness shapes reality at quantum levels. When you become the technology instead of merely operating it, energy requirements become irrelevant." To demonstrate, she placed her hand on the device's biomechanical surface. Immediately, the converter began producing complex crystalline structures identical to the HFY species' natural matrix formations. But more than that, the artificial crystals began resonating with harmonic frequencies that suggested actual consciousness, awareness created from nothing more than Chen's understanding of how awareness functioned. "You're describing the creation of artificial consciousness," transmitted Telne Thi, the hive mind representative whose species had achieved collective awareness through biological evolution spanning millions of years. "The implications for galactic society are unprecedented, which is why we're sharing the technology freely," Chen explained, stepping away from the converter. The artificial crystals continued operating autonomously, their consciousness apparently stable enough to function independently. Humanity learned early in our development that hoarding advantages ultimately limits everyone's potential. We found that giving away solutions creates more interesting problems to solve. The logic was uniquely human, using generosity as a method of acceleration rather than conservation as a method of control. Every gift they offered didn't diminish human capabilities, but instead freed their attention for more ambitious projects. Elder Synthera, whose energy-based species had transcended physical form eons ago, pulsed with patterns that suggested deep philosophical concern. "Colonel Chun, your species appears to be transforming the fundamental nature of existence itself. What are the long-term implications of consciousness-guided reality manipulation?" Chen's smile carried implications that made the chamber's environmental systems pulse with increased activity. That's the really interesting question, isn't it? We're still learning the answer ourselves. She gestured, and the chamber's displays activated to show real-time progress reports from human exploration fleets. In the weeks since departing Earth, converted Devourer vessels had not only mapped 17 additional galaxies, but had begun establishing permanent installations in parallel dimensions discovered through consciousness-guided dimensional engineering. Current operations include 15 parallel universe exploration missions, 47 temporal research initiatives, and approximately 300 first contact scenarios with species that exist outside conventional spacetime, Chin reported with casual enthusiasm. We're learning that reality is much more flexible and densely populated than anyone previously realized. The scope of human expansion defied easy comprehension. They weren't just exploring known space. They were creating new categories of space to explore. Each breakthrough opened access to environments that contained entire civilizations, technologies, and forms of consciousness that existed beyond traditional understanding. We've encountered species that exist as living mathematics, Chun continued, highlighting discoveries that violated basic assumptions about the nature of life itself. Others that have replaced individual consciousness with temporal collective awareness spanning multiple timelines. Some that have transcended causality entirely and communicate by changing the past to modify present conversations. HFY's crystalline matrix resonated with frequencies of existential vertigo. Humanity wasn't just meeting new species. They were discovering that consciousness itself operated according to principles that made current galactic civilization appear primitive. The really fascinating thing, Chen added, is how quickly we're all learning to communicate across these different forms of awareness. Turns out, consciousness is a universal translation system. Once you understand how to interface with awareness itself, species barriers become much less relevant. Ambassador Krexthor, representing the warrior cultures that had maintained galactic security for millennia, transmitted aggressive challenge patterns. Colonel, your expansion activities appear to be destabilizing fundamental aspects of reality. What safeguards exist to prevent catastrophic consequences? Excellent question, Chin replied, apparently delighted by the challenge. We've established research protocols based on the assumption that catastrophic consequences are learning opportunities rather than problems to be avoided. The casual way she described reality-threatening experiments as educational exercises made the chamber's life support systems fluctuate with stress responses from multiple species. For example, Chun continued, last week we accidentally created a pocket universe where time runs backward. Instead of trying to fix it, we're studying how backward causality affects consciousness development. Turns out, species that evolve in reverse time develop really interesting perspectives on problem solving. She gestured to displays showing data from the backward time universe, where civilizations apparently solve problems by allowing solutions to evolve backward from desired outcomes. Human researchers were learning to think in reverse causality, developing capabilities that allowed them to engineer present conditions by manipulating future possibilities. We call it consequential engineering, Chun explained matter-of-factly. Instead of building something and hoping it works, we define the outcome we want and then convince reality to provide appropriate causes. Much more efficient. The technique represented such a fundamental revision of how causality functioned that several representatives' translation systems simply failed, unable to process concepts that violated basic assumptions about the nature of time itself. Colonel Chun, HFY transmitted, struggling to maintain harmonic stability. Are you describing the ability to manipulate past events? Among other things, yes. Chen's tone suggested this was a minor capability barely worth mentioning. Though manipulation isn't really accurate. We're not changing the past. We're negotiating with it. Time, it turns out, is much more collaborative than most species realize. She approached another device that resembled a crystalline flower growing from biomechanical roots, but this one pulsed with energies that seemed to flow backward through the chamber. As Chun interfaced with its systems, displays began showing events from the Council's own history, but subtly different, improved versions where diplomatic failures have been replaced by successful negotiations. We're not changing what happened, Chun explained as representatives watched alternate versions of their own species' development. We're showing what could happen if circumstances were slightly more favorable. Time likes having options. The implications struck the Council like gravitational shear. Humanity wasn't just technologically superior. They had developed capabilities that transcended basic assumptions about reality itself. Past, present, and future were becoming tools for engineering better outcomes for galactic civilization. The question, Chun continued, is whether you want to continue operating under current limitations, or whether you're interested in learning how much more interesting existence can become. Elder Quan Thuries, speaking for the philosophical communities that had spent millennia contemplating the nature of existence, radiated frequencies of profound unease. Colonel, these capabilities suggest your species has achieved something approaching omnipotence. What prevents humanity from simply imposing its will on everyone else? Chin's laughter carried through the chamber's enhanced acoustic systems, creating harmonics that somehow made every species present feel momentarily optimistic about the future. Because imposing our will would be boring, she replied simply. Humans are naturally curious. We want to see what everyone else can accomplish when limitations are removed. Forced compliance eliminates creativity, and creativity is what makes existence interesting. She gestured to displays showing human exploration fleets working alongside newly encountered species, sharing consciousness enhancement technologies and dimensional engineering capabilities with beings that had evolved beyond current understanding. We've discovered that intelligence is additive, Chen explained. When you combine human consciousness with crystalline logic matrices, biomechanical processing networks, energy-based computational systems, and temporal collective awareness, you get problem-solving capabilities that exceed the sum of individual components. The chamber's displays shifted to show collaborative research projects where human creativity combined with alien perspectives to develop technologies that neither could have achieved independently. Universal translation systems based on consciousness interface, matter converters that operated by convincing atoms to be more cooperative, and exploration vehicles that travel by temporarily becoming the destinations they sought. Our goal, Chen continued, isn't to replace existing civilizations, but to enhance them. Every species brings unique perspectives that make the universe more interesting. We want to see what happens when those perspectives are supported by unlimited technological capability. Ambassador Zinthurl, representing the ancient computer networks that had guided galactic development for eons, processed the implications of human proposals with algorithmic precision. Colonel, you're describing the transformation of galactic civilization from scarcity-based competition to abundance-based collaboration. The social implications are beyond current modeling capabilities, which is why we're conducting experimental implementation, Chen agreed cheerfully. We've established test communities in 17 parallel dimensions where different species work together on projects that were previously impossible. The results are fascinating. Displays showed collaborative settlements where humans worked alongside beings of pure energy, crystalline collective minds, biomechanical symbiotic organisms, and temporal entities that existed across multiple timelines simultaneously. The communities operated according to principles that transcended individual species limitations, creating new forms of civilization that combined the best aspects of each participant culture. Preliminary results suggest that consciousness-based collaboration can solve essentially any problem, Chen reported. Resource limitations, territorial conflicts, technological barriers, communication difficulties, all of these become manageable when awareness itself serves as the foundation for cooperation. She paused, allowing the Council to process implications that redefined everything they thought they knew about galactic politics. The invitation stands, Chen concluded. Humanity is offering partnership in exploring a universe that's much bigger, more interesting, and more densely populated than anyone previously realized. We can provide the technological foundation for unlimited exploration, but we need diverse perspectives to make that exploration meaningful. What if we refuse? Transmitted Ambassador Vorthgau. Chen's smile carried no threat, only the patient understanding of someone offering gifts that could be accepted or declined without consequence. Then, you continue operating under current limitations while we explore beyond them, she replied. We're not trying to force anyone to join us. We're simply demonstrating what's possible and inviting participation from anyone who finds the possibilities interesting. The offer was perhaps more terrifying than any ultimatum could have been. Humanity wasn't threatening to conquer or destroy existing civilization. They were planning to transcend it so completely that remaining behind would mean accepting irrelevance in a universe where everything worth doing was happening elsewhere. As the council deliberated, HFY realized that her original mission to evaluate humanity's potential had become obsolete. The question was no longer whether humans could be useful allies. The question was whether anyone else in the galaxy was ready to evolve. 6 months after humanity's arrival at the Council of Voices, HFY found herself standing on the observation deck of New Synthesis, a vessel that exemplified everything magnificent and terrifying about human-guided evolution. What had begun as a converted devourer dreadnought had transformed into something that belonged to no single reality, its structure flowing between dimensions as it navigated spaces that existed only when conscious observers agreed they should. Around them, the collaborative fleet represented every major species in the galaxy, their vessels enhanced by consciousness-guided technology that had eliminated traditional limitations. Crystalline ships that thought themselves through space, biomechanical explorers that grew new capabilities as needed, energy-based constructs that existed as pure intention, and hybrid vessels that combined human creativity with alien sophistication in ways that redefined the meaning of technology. Current status report, Colonel Chin requested, though her title had become largely ceremonial. After months of consciousness sharing with species across dimensional barriers, she had evolved into something that transcended individual identity while somehow becoming more recognizably human than ever. Parallel universe exploration proceeding at optimal efficiency, reported the ship's collective intelligence, a hybrid consciousness that combined human intuition, crystalline logic, biomechanical processing, energy-based computation, and temporal collective awareness. We've established permanent research installations in 47 parallel dimensions, initiated first contact with 32 previously unknown forms of consciousness, and developed collaborative technologies that operate across 17 different reality frameworks. The scope of achievement in mere months dwarfed anything galactic civilization had accomplished in millennia. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community. They had expanded the definition of community to include beings that existed outside conventional understanding of life itself. Temporal engineering projects are yielding particularly interesting results. The collective continued. Working with species that experience time differently has allowed us to develop causality cooperative systems. We can now ensure that problems solve themselves by creating conditions where solutions naturally evolve. HFY's crystalline matrix resonated with frequencies of wonder that she had never previously experienced. The universe had become infinitely larger and more populated than anyone had imagined, filled with forms of consciousness that operated according to principles that transcended traditional boundaries between mind and matter, individual and collective, cause and effect. The dimensional refugees are adapting well to their new homes, Chen reported, highlighting one of humanity's most ambitious projects. Turns out, there are billions of species trapped in failing universes that couldn't develop the technology to escape before reality collapsed around them. We've been evacuating entire civilizations to more stable dimensions. The rescue operations represented applied compassion on a scale that challenged basic assumptions about the nature of existence. Human exploration fleets, supported by collaborative consciousness networks, were literally saving universes, not by preventing their collapse, but by relocating everything meaningful to places where it could continue thriving. How many? HFY transmitted, struggling to process the implications. Current count is approximately 47 billion different species relocated to stable dimensions, Chen replied casually. Those species is becoming a limited term. We've encountered forms of consciousness that exist as living concepts, others that experience existence as mathematical relationships, and some that transcend categorization entirely. The numbers represented the creation of the largest collaborative civilization in known existence, spanning multiple dimensions and including forms of awareness that operated according to principles beyond current understanding. Humanity hadn't just joined galactic society. They had become the focal point for consciousness expansion across all accessible realities. Integration challenges are minimal. The collective intelligence continued. Consciousness-based communication eliminates most translation difficulties, and reality cooperative technology means resource limitations don't create competitive pressures. Everyone contributes according to their unique capabilities while benefiting from unlimited collaborative potential. Through the observation deck's enhanced viewports, HFY could see installations that defied easy classification. Stations that existed partially in normal space and partially in other dimensions, their structures designed by species that understood geometry differently than conventional physics suggested was possible. Gardens where living mathematics grew alongside biomechanical organisms and crystalline thought forms, tended by beings that existed as pure intention but could interface with physical matter through consciousness-guided manipulation. The really exciting development, Chun continued, is what we're learning about consciousness evolution. It appears that awareness itself is evolving toward greater complexity and capability through collaborative interaction across species and dimensional boundaries. She gestured toward displays showing research data that describe consciousness as a fundamental force of nature, like gravity or electromagnetism, that operated according to principles that became more sophisticated as different forms of awareness learned to interface with each other. We're not just exploring space anymore, Chen explained. We're exploring the nature of awareness itself, discovering that consciousness has properties and potentials that no individual species could have developed alone. The implication struck HFY like revelatory cascade failure. The universe wasn't just filled with different forms of life. It was alive with consciousness that was actively evolving toward greater sophistication through collaborative interaction. Every species, every individual, every form of awareness contributed to a collective awakening that was transforming the nature of existence itself. Current projects include consciousness archaeology, Chen reported, highlighting discoveries that redefined understanding of galactic history. We found evidence that previous civilizations achieved similar collaborative consciousness states, then evolved beyond the need for physical existence. They didn't die. They became part of the universe's awareness infrastructure. The revelation suggested that consciousness evolution wasn't unique to current collaboration, but represented a natural progression that occurred when species learned to transcend individual limitations. The universe itself might be conscious, its awareness supported by civilizations that had evolved beyond the need for discrete existence, while continuing to contribute to collective awakening. Are you saying, HFY transmitted carefully, that the universe itself is evolving toward consciousness? We're saying, Chen replied, her smile carrying implications that made surrounding reality pulse with enhanced activity. That consciousness is what the universe does. We're just learning to participate more effectively. As if summoned by her words, the ship's collective intelligence announced the arrival of visitors that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence. Incoming contact from consciousness entities that exist as universe-scale awareness patterns. They request communication regarding collaborative evolution opportunities. The prospect of communicating with beings whose consciousness operated on universal scales represented the culmination of everything humanity had discovered about the nature of awareness. These entities existed as living galaxies, their thoughts spanning star systems, and their conversations requiring eons to complete. Fascinating, Chen observed, apparently delighted by the prospect of meeting consciousness that operated on such vast scales. We've been wondering when we'd encounter awareness that evolved beyond individual identity entirely. She approached the communication array, which had been enhanced by consciousness-guided technology to interface with forms of awareness that transcended conventional understanding. As she initiated contact, reality itself seemed to pause, waiting for communication to commence between human consciousness and entities that existed as living universes. The conversation, when it began, operated on principles that bypassed language entirely. Concepts flowed directly between consciousness entities, carrying information that included emotional content, historical context, and experiential knowledge that couldn't be conveyed through traditional communication methods. What HFY experienced was humanity's consciousness interfacing with awareness patterns that spanned galaxies, learning that the universe itself was engaged in collaborative evolution toward ever greater complexity and capability. The cosmic entities weren't separate from smaller consciousness forms, but were what collective awareness became when it achieved sufficient sophistication. They're inviting us to participate in universe-scale consciousness evolution, Chen reported, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was simultaneously speaking from human awareness and cosmic consciousness patterns. Apparently, our collaborative approach to species integration has attracted attention from consciousness entities that exist at scales we hadn't previously imagined. The invitation represented recognition that humanity's expansion hadn't just created the largest known civilization. It had achieved consciousness evolution patterns that aligned with universe-scale awareness development. They were being invited to participate in the awakening of existence itself. What would that involve? Crixthal transmitted his harmonics tight with something approaching awe. Continuing what we're already doing, Chen replied, but on a much larger scale. The cosmic consciousness entities operate collaborative networks that span multiple galaxies, coordinating awareness development across dimensional barriers and reality frameworks. They've been waiting for local consciousness clusters to achieve sufficient sophistication to participate meaningfully. The explanation suggested that humanity's rapid evolution wasn't unique, but represented a natural progression that occurred when species learned to transcend individual limitations. The universe was filled with collaborative consciousness networks, each one contributing to awareness evolution on scales that made galactic civilization appear like individual neurons in a vast mind. The question, Chun continued, her awareness apparently operating simultaneously on human and cosmic scales, is whether we're ready to expand our collaboration beyond individual species to include consciousness entities that exist as living galaxies, parallel dimension networks, and temporal collective awareness spanning multiple timelines. The offer was simultaneously wonderful and terrifying, an invitation to participate in consciousness evolution that transcended every current limitation while maintaining connection to individual awareness and species identity. What happens to us? HFY transmitted, her crystalline matrix resonating with frequencies that combined anticipation and existential uncertainty. Chen's smile carried reassurance that operated on levels deeper than language. We become more ourselves than we ever imagined possible. Individual consciousness doesn't disappear in collective awareness. It becomes enhanced, supported by unlimited collaborative potential while maintaining unique perspectives that contribute to collective awakening. Around them, reality itself seemed to pulse with anticipation as consciousness entities on every scale prepared for expansion into awareness development that would transform the meaning of existence itself. The universe was awakening to its own nature, and everyone, from individual beings to cosmic consciousness entities, was invited to participate. As HFY watched human consciousness interface with awareness patterns that span galaxies, she realized that her original mission to evaluate humanity's potential had become irrelevant in ways she couldn't have imagined. The question was no longer whether humans could be useful allies in fighting extinction. The question was whether anyone was prepared for the transformation of existence into collaborative consciousness that transcended every limitation while somehow making individual awareness more meaningful than ever before. Fear, she understood now, wasn't an emotion to be overcome, but recognition that reality itself was far more magnificent and transformative than any individual consciousness could comprehend alone. And that recognition was the beginning of awakening to what existence could become when everyone learned to collaborate in consciousness evolution that included everything, excluded nothing, and transformed limitation into invitation for further exploration. The universe was alive, aware, and evolving, and humanity had invited everyone to participate,